finding myself through love, loss, and heartbreak. Before everything changed, I used to believe life followed a certain rhythm, predictable, almost mechanical. I had my routines, my quiet mornings, my 2 sugars in coffee, my unread books lining the shelf like a promise I never intended to keep. Relationships, for the most part, felt like optional chapters in the novel of my existence. The kind of chapters you skip because they aren't integral to the plot. It wasn't that I disliked people. I just didn't know how to let them in without fearing the mess they might bring. Love, to me, always like something fragile in other people's hands, something they cracked and cried over while I observed from a safe distance. That changed when she moved in upstairs. I didn't even notice her at first. She arrived during the week I was buried in quarterly reports, the kind of exhausting labor that sucks the air from your lungs without you noticing. I only became aware of her presence because of the sound of her footsteps, light, fast, unpredictable, like she was always chasing something just out of reach. Apartment 312. That was her unit. I lived in 212, 1 floor below. The first time I actually saw her, she was wearing a mustard yellow raincoat, standing in the hallway arguing with the vending machine. She kept pressing the same button and muttering something under her breath. I watched her for a moment amused, and then continued on, not knowing then that I would come to memorize the shape of her hands and the lines of frustration on her forehead when the world didn't cooperate. The second time, she knocked on my door by mistake. Her Wi-Fi wasn't working, she said, and she thought maybe I was the landlord. I wasn't, but I offered to help anyway. That's how it began, over a faulty router and a stack of tangled cables. Her name was Elise. She laughed like someone who wasn't afraid to sound ridiculous. She had freckles that made constellations across her cheeks and a strange obsession with documentaries about shipwrecks. I found her odd in the way people who carry too much beauty and sorrow tend to be. You know they've seen something, felt something, and now they walk through the world slightly tilted. We started seeing more of each other. Not intentionally at first. Just those small shared moments waiting for the elevator, bumping into each other at the mailbox, sharing a coffee on the front steps when the power went out for 3 hours one rainy night. Then came the real invitations. Do you want to come up for tea? I made too much pasta. Do you want some? I have an extra ticket to this weird art show. Interested? Each question chipped away at the walls I had spent so many years building. Elise didn't ask me to change. She didn't try to fix me. She just listened. She was chaos in soft packaging, a whirlwind dressed in thrift store sweaters, and somehow, her unpredictability made me feel safe. It was the opposite of everything I thought I needed. We spent the autumn wrapped in blankets and in each other. She played old records and made me dance in the kitchen even though I hated dancing. I learned the songs by heart just to see her smile when I mouthed the words. Sometimes we stayed up until dawn talking about dreams we didn't even believe in. I told her things I hadn't said out loud in years. About my father's silence. About the girl who left me without a note. About the days I felt like a ghost walking through my own life. She didn't flinch. She simply reached for my hand like that made all the difference. It did. I fell for her in layers. Not in a thunderclap or some dramatic fall, but in small collapses of logic and caution. I found myself looking forward to her messages, to the scent of her shampoo on my pillow, to the way she always made 2 cups of tea, even if I hadn't said I was coming up. Love wasn't a tidal wave with Elise. It was rain on the window, steady and soft until suddenly everything was soaked. But nothing stays still forever. Around late January, I noticed something had changed. It wasn't loud, not at first. Just a quiet shift. Elise would stare out the window longer than usual. She stopped humming while brushing her teeth. Her laughter came with an echo, like it had to travel farther to reach me. I asked if she was okay. She said she was just tired. I knew better, but I didn't press. Maybe I should have. One night, she didn't come home. I sat by my door like some anxious pet, pretending I wasn't waiting, pretending I wasn't checking my phone every 4 minutes. When she finally walked in the next morning, her hair smelled like a bar I didn't recognize, and her eyes didn't meet mine. She said she'd slept at a friend's. I didn't ask who. Instead, I nodded and said okay. That was the beginning of the unraveling. Not a sharp tear, but a gradual fray. Days where she'd disappear without explanation. Moments where she seemed somewhere else even when sitting beside me. I told myself not to be paranoid. I told myself to trust her. But trust isn't a button you can press, and doubt has a way of echoing louder than facts. Still, I tried. I held on even as she pulled away. I told her I loved her, hoping it would be enough to anchor her to me. She kissed me with cold lips and said she knew. She didn't say it back. In February, she asked for space. She said she needed time to figure things out. I said I understood, though every part of me screamed otherwise. She moved back in with her sister across town. Said it was temporary. Said she just needed to breathe. I didn't sleep much after that. My apartment felt like a museum of someone who used to be alive. Her cup still sat in the sink. Her hair tie on my lamp. I kept seeing her everywhere, and yet she was nowhere. I sent her messages. She replied with kindness but not warmth. I asked if she missed me. She said she didn't know. The people think heartbreak is loud, that it comes with shouting and tears. But sometimes it's just silence. Deafening, brutal silence. I stopped reaching out. I deleted the playlist we made. I put her books in a box and shoved it under the bed. I tried to move forward, but my feet felt rooted to memories. Until one day, I ran into her. Just like that, in the most ordinary way. At the corner bakery, she looked tired. Older, somehow she smiled, but her eyes were distant. We exchanged hellos. She said she was doing better. I said I was fine. We both lied. I asked if she wanted to get coffee. She hesitated, then nodded. We sat by the window and talked about nothing. Weather, work, the city. She mentioned a guy she was seeing, casually, like tossing a pebble into a lake to see if it ripples. It did. I asked if she was happy. She paused for too long, then said she was trying. I told her I missed her. She looked down at her cup, fingers trembling slightly, and said she missed me too. But not in the way I wanted. She said she loved the idea of us more than the reality. That I was steady when she needed chaos, and now that she was finding her calm, she didn't know where I fit. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't make us both bleed. She hugged me goodbye like we were acquaintances. I watched her walk away, realizing that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the timing is wrong. Sometimes the person who teaches you how to feel again isn't the one who stays. I went home, opened the windows, and let the cold air in. For the first time in months, I didn't feel suffocated. I still thought of her, but it hurt less. Healing doesn't come all at once. It drips in like sunlight after a storm. And I knew, somehow, that this was only the beginning of something else. Something I hadn't yet met. I didn't expect anything to follow. After Elise, I told myself I'd keep the door closed a while longer this time. Figuratively and literally. The apartment turned back into a quiet space, filled with small routines. I returned to reading half-finished novels, rearranging furniture like that would reorganize the pain, listening to the same instrumental playlist while pretending to work. People talk a lot about healing, but what they never tell you is how boring it is, how numb. The hardest part isn't crying. It's the way the silence wraps around your life and becomes normal. It's the awkwardness of smiling at strangers when you're not sure you even remember how to mean it. Still, time passed. It always does. I didn't meet anyone new, not right away. I wasn't looking. But life doesn't need permission to throw people into your path, especially when you've sworn you won't let anyone else in. Her name was Julia. We met at a friend's book club I didn't even want to attend. I remember walking in late, flustered, and taking the only empty seat left. Right next to her. She had on these glasses that kept sliding down her nose, and a pen in her hair she must have forgotten was even there. When she spoke, it was with intention. No fluff, no filler, just direct, grounded words. and something about that pulled me in. I don't know why. Maybe I was tired of the dramatic highs and lows. Julia felt like breath after drowning. She didn't ask too many questions. She didn't press into corners I didn't want to explore. She was simply present, solid. Over the next few weeks, we kept bumping into each other. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then I learned she'd joined another club just because she figured I'd be there. That made me smile more than it should have. She wasn't like Elise. Not at all. Where Elise had been chaos in motion, Julia was calm incarnate. Where Elise painted in metaphors and dreams, Julia dealt in logic and goals. She worked in data analytics, could break down complex systems like they were Lego sets, and she always had her life planned 3 months in advance. Our first real conversation outside the clubs was about the psychology of grocery store layouts. She said they're designed to make you linger, to spend, to confuse impulse with necessity. And maybe that's what she became for me, a quiet necessity. We started spending more time together. At first in groups, then alone. Coffee turned into brunch. Brunch into long walks. Walks into afternoons in bookstores, evenings in the park, movie nights with badly timed commentary that we both found hilarious. There was no whirlwind this time. No electric rush. Just a slow building, brick by brick. I liked that, I needed that. When I finally kissed her, it didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like finding a page you didn't know was missing and realizing the story made more sense now. Julia didn't try to replace Elise. She never even asked about her directly. But one night, I told her anyway. We were lying on the floor, eating ice cream out of the tub, talking about regrets. I mentioned Elise. Not to compare, but because that story was part of me now. Julia listened. Then she simply nodded and said, "Sometimes we don't heal to love again. We heal to love differently." That line stayed with me. We fell into a rhythm after that. She started staying over. Her toothbrush showed up in my bathroom. Her favorite cereal appeared in my cabinet, even though I never ate it. She folded her clothes with precision I found both admirable and slightly unsettling. We never argued, not seriously. We disagreed, of course, about movies, politics, what counted as a proper meal. But nothing explosive, nothing dangerous. And that was the first red flag, though I didn't see it at the time. We were too smooth, too polished. Like we were both trying so hard not to repeat the past that we forgot how to be vulnerable in the present. Julia was careful, methodical. She never said something unless she'd already considered how I'd receive it. I appreciated the thoughtfulness, but eventually I started craving something messier. Something raw. That realization scared me. I thought, am I addicted to emotional chaos? Do I only know how to love when it's burning? But it wasn't about chaos. It was about honesty. Julia was many things, kind, supportive, reliable. But she kept parts of herself locked away. I noticed it when I brought up dreams. She'd deflect. When I asked about her family, she'd give me clean, clinical answers, nothing personal. Even her apartment, immaculate, color-coordinated, museum-like, felt like a place meant to impress, not comfort. I tried not to let it bother me. After all, wasn't this what I said I wanted? Peace, stability. A relationship that didn't leave me exhausted. But you can have peace and still feel lonely. One evening, we were making dinner. Julia was chopping onions, eyes focused, lips slightly parted in concentration. I watched her for a moment, admiring the way she moved, the precision of her hands. Then I said, almost without thinking, "Do you ever feel like we're acting?" She stopped, knife midair. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, unsure if I even knew what I meant. Sometimes it feels like we're rehearsing the roles of people who love each other instead of just being. She turned to face me, a flash of hurt in her expression. "You think I'm pretending?" "No," I said quickly. "Not pretending, just performing, like we're both afraid to break the rhythm we've created." She didn't respond. She went back to chopping, a little faster now. The next few days were quiet. Not cold, just careful. I hated that word, careful. It kept ringing in my head like a warning bell. I tried to shake it. We had good moments too. She made me laugh when I forgot how. She held me on nights I didn't know I needed holding. But there was always a ceiling we couldn't break through. One day, Julia came home with a book. It was about emotional intimacy, about breaking cycles of detachment. She handed it to me like a peace offering. I read it, and I realized she was trying. In her own way, she was reaching across the invisible distance. So I tried too. I asked deeper questions. I shared more. I opened wounds I'd kept bandaged. For a while it helped. We found a deeper groove. The sex felt more connected. Our silences became companionable instead of awkward. I started thinking maybe this could last. Maybe love doesn't always need to be explosive. Maybe it's okay if it's quiet. Maybe I just need to stop searching for drama and start appreciating the stillness. Then came the day she brought up moving in. It was over brunch, her fork pausing midair as she said it like a casual observation. We're already spending most nights together. Doesn't it make sense? It did, logically. But something inside me tightened. Not fear, exactly. More like hesitation. I asked if we could think on it. She said, of course. But I saw the flicker in her eyes. A flicker of again, like she'd been here before, with someone else who hesitated too long. That night, I found myself wandering. Not physically, mentally. I started thinking about Elise again. Not because I missed her, but because I wanted to understand what was different. With Elise, I never had to guess what she felt. With Julia, I often did. I realized something else too. When Julia was upset, she didn't show it. She folded it into smiles, into productivity, into plans. I used to think I wanted someone who didn't fall apart. But now I saw the problem. If someone never falls apart in front of you, you never know where the real pieces are. You never know if you're holding a person or just the version they want to be seen. I wanted more. Not more passion. More truth. I brought it up gently. We were walking home from a movie, her arm looped through mine. I said I needed to feel her more. Not physically, emotionally. She stiffened. Said she didn't know what that meant. I tried to explain. She listened, nodding. And then she said something I'll never forget. Maybe I'm not broken enough for you. That line hit me like a slap. It wasn't said with anger, just quiet resignation. Like she'd been expecting this all along. Like she'd hoped I'd be the one person who didn't need her to unravel to feel close. We didn't break up that night. We didn't even argue, but something shifted. A thread snapped. In the days that followed, we both grew quieter. Not out of spite, out of understanding. Like two people slowly realizing they're speaking different dialects of the same language. I knew then what was coming. And I think she did too. But we both pretended we didn't, because saying goodbye to something good, even if it's not great, still hurts. And neither of us were ready for that yet. Not then. Not quite. We didn't end abruptly. There was no dramatic fight, no slammed doors or teary ultimatums. Our goodbye happened in stages, in the quiet erosion of plans, in the soft closing of possibilities. Julia and I drifted like two boats losing the current that once held them side by side. And in a strange way, that made it harder. When love dies without spectacle, there's no single moment to mourn. It just fades, and you keep searching for the day it slipped away while still pretending everything's fine. We had a weekend trip planned to the coast, a cozy cabin with a sea view, booked during our better days. I suggested we still go as friends, maybe as something in between. Julia hesitated for a long second before saying yes. I think we both knew it would be our last chapter. The drive there was filled with polite conversation, too many pauses, too much radio. The ocean was gray and restless, matching our energy. We unpacked, made dinner, watched an old film on her laptop with mugs of tea that neither of us finished. That night, we lay side by side in the same bed, but didn't touch. I watched the ceiling, counting the seconds between waves crashing against the rocks. Around 2 a.m., I whispered her name. She turned, eyes open in the dark, already awake. "I'm sorry," I said. She didn't ask what for. She just whispered, "Hey, me too," and reached for my hand. It was the most intimate moment we'd shared in weeks. We didn't talk more that night. But in the morning, the silence between us was no longer heavy. It was filled with understanding. When we returned to the city, she packed up her things a few days later. We didn't call it a breakup. We called it taking time apart. But both of us knew there would be no return. And so I was alone again. Not in the same way as before, though. This time, I didn't feel broken. Just quiet, like a room after a good song ends. I found myself thinking about all the ways people come into your life. Elise arrived like a storm, Julia like a structure, and I was the same man in both stories, yet changed by each. The following weeks moved slowly. I went back to my routines: morning coffee, evening walks, reading work. But something had shifted. I wasn't content with the quiet anymore. I started noticing things again. The way the sunlight hit the park benches at 4 p.m., the strange symbols drawn in chalk on the sidewalk by kids, the smell of fresh bread from the corner bakery. It was like my senses had come back online. I began writing again, something I hadn't done since university, not with any purpose, just journaling, mostly. I filled page after page with thoughts that had no destination. It felt good to empty myself onto paper, to not edit or overthink. Some days I wrote letters I never sent. To Elise, to Julia, to myself. It became a kind of therapy. I started frequenting a coffee shop I'd ignored for years, a cozy little place with mismatched chairs and dusty bookshelves. The barista there, an older man with a thick beard and tired eyes, always had jazz playing softly in the background. One afternoon, while sipping an espresso and scribbling into my journal, I heard a voice from the table beside me. "You left your pen at the counter." I looked up. She was holding it out to me. A woman around my age, red scarf around her neck, paint on her fingertips. "Thanks," I said. She smiled. "You're the guy who's always writing, right?" "Trying to," I answered, suddenly aware of how many times she must have seen me here before. She nodded, then gestured to the seat across from mine. "Mind if I sit? All the other tables are taken." They weren't, but I didn't correct her. I just said sure. Her name was Mira. She was a freelance illustrator. She had just moved back into the city after years abroad. There was something refreshing about the way she talked. No layers, no attempts to impress, just an unfiltered presence. We talked about books, art, music, the neighborhood, the weird coffee flavors the shop sometimes tested. That afternoon turned into a habit. Every few days, we'd find ourselves at the same table, talking like old friends. I told her I wasn't looking for anything. She said she wasn't either. That made it easier, lighter. But connections have a way of growing roots even when you swear they won't. Mira had a way of seeing people. Not just hearing, but really seeing. Once, while watching the rain through the shop window, she said, "You carry silence like it's armor." I didn't know how to reply. She smiled, not expecting me to. We never labeled what we were. We just existed in each other's orbit. She'd sketch in her notebook while I wrote in mine, occasionally sharing a passage or a drawing. One day she handed me a small painting she'd done, a coffee cup with steam forming into abstract shapes. "This reminded me of you," she said. I didn't ask why. I just took it, holding the gesture like a fragile thing. Eventually, we kissed. It wasn't planned. It wasn't dramatic. It happened on a street corner after a late walk, both of us laughing over something dumb, and then suddenly we weren't laughing. Our eyes met, and the moment asked for nothing but surrender. It felt like breathing. No fireworks, no epiphany, just breathing. I remember going home that night thinking, so this is what peace feels like when it's real. We didn't become inseparable overnight. Mira valued space. She had her own rhythms, her own patterns. But there was comfort in the irregularity. Some days we talked for hours. Others, we didn't speak but shared the same room, content in silence. I told her about Elise, about Julia. Not all at once, but gradually. She listened. She didn't try to interpret, didn't offer advice. She just absorbed the weight of those stories and let them settle between us. "People aren't lessons," she said once. "They're just chapters. Some you reread, some you outgrow, but they all belong in the story." Mira didn't ask me to change. She didn't fill gaps. I didn't have to be empty with her to feel full. She simply stood beside me, honest and imperfect, and I found myself letting go of expectations I didn't realize I was still carrying. There was one moment that marked the real shift. I was at home, organizing old boxes. I found a photo of Elise tucked into an envelope with a faded train ticket. I stared at it for a long while, not with longing but reflection. Later, I showed it to Mira. This was her? I said. Mira took the photo, studied it, then handed it back. She looks like someone who taught you something. She did, I replied. And you? She smiled. I'm someone who reminds you what you already knew. That night, I wrote in my journal, love doesn't always return the way you sent it out. Sometimes it comes back quieter, wiser, wrapped in someone else's voice. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if Mira and I would last a year, a decade, or just a season. But for the first time, that uncertainty didn't scare me, because love, I realized, isn't about finding someone to complete you. It's about finding someone who accepts the incomplete parts without trying to redraw the edges. And with her, I didn't feel like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. I felt like a full picture, even if some of the corners were still missing. That was enough, at least for now. Mira and I settled into something that wasn't quite a rhythm and wasn't quite chaos. We existed in this delicate equilibrium where silence didn't mean discomfort, and affection didn't always require proof. We didn't count milestones the way couples often do. No monthly anniversaries, no performative posts, no catalog of firsts framed in digital memory. Instead, we collected the quiet, forgettable moments that end up meaning the most. Her sock half tucked under the couch. My mug always left in her sink. The way we reached for each other absent-mindedly in conversation. It was love, but not the kind I'd been taught to chase. It was love that didn't need to be declared loudly to be felt deeply. One chilly April morning, I woke to the sound of Mira sketching by the window. She didn't know I was watching. Her brow furrowed, her fingers moving in instinctual swirls of graphite. She was drawing something she wasn't looking at, something inside her. I wondered how many versions of me lived in her head. When I finally stirred, she looked up and said, I had a dream that we were old and you still made your awful coffee the same way. I grinned, more at her tone than the words. What if I never get better at it? She shrugged. Then, I'll just bring my own beans. That was Mira. She never asked me to be someone else. She just adjusted her stride to walk beside me, even when the path wasn't straight. But the closer we grew, the more the world seemed to resist the stillness we created. Her mother fell ill that spring. A quiet, creeping illness that the doctors danced around with euphemisms. Mira didn't say much at first, just that she needed to visit home more often, that she might be distracted. I told her I'd be here, however she needed. And I meant it. For weeks, I stayed in the periphery of her storm. I brought soup, sent her poems, walked her dog when she had to take a last-minute train to the countryside. I didn't ask questions. I didn't press. I thought that was what she needed, space, not pressure. But sometimes, not pressing is its own kind of absence. She started pulling away. Not dramatically, not cruelly. Just small things. Less eye contact. Shorter replies. A delay in her laugh. I chalked it up to stress. I told myself she'd return to me once things calmed. But life doesn't always calm. It compounds. And so did the distance. She stopped staying over, stopped inviting me into her world. Our shared rituals withered into occasional texts and increasingly delayed replies. And I, in my usual fashion, waited quietly. Waited for her to say she needed me. Waited for the storm to pass. One Sunday afternoon, I finally broke the pattern. I went to her apartment unannounced, something I'd never done before. She opened the door with that familiar half-smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She said softly, stepping aside. Her place looked untouched, like she hadn't lived in it for weeks. Dishes piled in the sink, canvases leaning against walls, half-finished and abandoned. "Yuka?" I asked. She nodded, just tired. I sat on the couch. She sat across from me, legs pulled up, arms hugging her knees. We sat there, silence stretching like elastic between us. "I miss you," I finally said. Her eyes flicked to mine, then away. "I miss you too." "But," I prompted, already sensing its arrival. "But I don't know how to carry this and us at the same time," she whispered. "I feel like I'm failing both." My heart clenched, not because she said it, but because I understood. Because I'd felt that exact fear before. "You're not failing," I said. "You're human." She nodded, eyes glassy. "That's the problem. We didn't break up that day. We didn't even talk about separating. But the end began to crystallize in the spaces between our words. Over the next month, she became a ghost in my life, present in traces. Her jacket still hung on my door, her favorite tea in my cabinet, her dog's leash in my hallway, but she wasn't there. Not really. And one morning I woke up to a message. "I think I need to be alone for a while." "I'm sorry," that was it. No explosion. No final kiss. Just a soft, inevitable end. I didn't respond right away. What could I say? That I understood, that I didn't. Both felt true. Eventually, I just wrote "I'll leave your things at the front desk. Take your time." And then I sat on the floor of my apartment for what felt like hours, surrounded by objects that had once meant warmth and now only echoed her absence. The weeks after Mira left were not like the others. I didn't retreat into silence this time. I didn't numb myself with routine. I let myself feel it all. The anger, the hollowness. I talked to friends I'd neglected. I went on long walks without purpose. I wrote pages and pages of thoughts, most of them messy, confused, contradictory. I didn't seek closure. I didn't pretend to have answers. I just lived through it. And then, one evening, months later, I saw her. I was walking by the river, watching the streetlights flicker on, when I noticed her sitting on a bench. Alone, sketchbook in her lap. She didn't see me. I watched her for a few seconds, unsure. Then I walked on, not out of anger, not out of pride, but because sometimes love means letting go quietly, without asking for more than what was already given. Mira was a chapter too. A long, important one. One that taught me what it meant to be present, what it meant to love someone in their becoming, not just their being. And as I walked away, I realized I didn't need her to return for the story to be complete. Some people are not your ending, they're your turning point. Later that night, back in my apartment, I picked up my pen and began to write again. But this time, it wasn't about Elise, or Julia, or Mira. It was about me, about the spaces I used to fill with other people, about the fears I'd kept hidden beneath borrowed love. I wrote about how easy it is to confuse connection with compatibility, affection with permanence. I wrote about how healing doesn't make you invincible, just more aware of what you truly need. And then, something unexpected happened. A message, not from Mira, not from Julia, from someone I didn't know at all. It was a reply to a post I'd written online weeks earlier, a piece about loneliness and the quiet beauty of solitude. The message was simple. Your words felt like they were written from my bones. Thank you for reminding me I'm not alone. No name. Just that. And for the first time in months, I smiled. Because maybe love doesn't always return in the form it left. Maybe sometimes it comes back as understanding, as connection in a stranger's message, as the warmth of your own voice echoing back from someone else's pain. I didn't know what would come next. Whether I'd fall in love again, whether the pages ahead would be shared or solitary. But I knew one thing for certain. This time, I wouldn't skip the chapters in between. I would live every word, every pause, every comma, because even the quietest parts of our story deserve to be written. Summer crept in slowly, almost as if it were uncertain whether it was welcome. The air thickened, the evenings stretched, and the city wore a kind of lazy elegance that made everything feel a little slower, a little softer. I found myself walking more often, without reason, just letting the streets pull me along. I had no destination. That was the point. I wasn't looking for anyone anymore. I wasn't even looking for myself. I just let each hour arrive without expectation. and that was new. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for a person or a purpose to give my days meaning. There was peace in that kind of aimlessness, a quiet truth in the absence of longing. But life has a strange sense of humor. It tends to bring people back when you've finally made peace with their absence. It started with a letter. Not an email, not a text. An actual envelope, slightly torn at the edge, left in my mailbox with my name scrawled in handwriting I hadn't seen in what felt like forever. The moment I saw it, I knew who it was from. Elise. I just stood there, holding it like it was a live wire. I didn't open it right away. I brought it upstairs, placed it on the kitchen table, made coffee, sat down, stood up, paced, sat again. Finally, I tore the edge with a kind of reverence and pulled out the folded paper. It was short, 3 paragraphs, but every word carried the weight of old echoes. She said she'd been thinking about me, about us, that she'd made mistakes. Big ones. And she wasn't writing to fix anything. She just wanted me to know that what we had mattered. That it wasn't a lie. That maybe she hadn't been ready to love the way I did back then. But that didn't mean she hadn't tried. She said she kept a photo of us tucked in the back of a novel she never finished. And that sometimes, when life got too loud, she looked at it and remembered the way we used to laugh in the kitchen at 2 a.m. She ended the letter with a line I read over and over. But if this finds you at a moment when forgiveness feels possible, I'd love to have coffee sometime. No expectations. Just presence. I didn't know how to feel. I thought I'd buried that chapter. I thought I'd come to terms with everything she was and everything she wasn't. But grief doesn't always die. Sometimes it hibernates, and the letter stirred something I wasn't prepared to face again. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to sit with the past, to hold it up against the person I'd become. I reread her letter every night for a week. I memorized the loop of her yes, the way she still misspelled, definitely. The subtle apology threaded between lines. On the 8th day, I replied. Briefly, I said I'd meet her for coffee. 1 hour. 1 conversation. We met at the same coffee shop where I used to write beside Mira. I don't know why I picked that place. Maybe I wanted to reclaim it. Maybe I just liked the idea of familiar ghosts sitting quietly in the corners. Elise arrived late. Of course she did. But when she walked in, I felt a strange calm. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, her style simpler, but her eyes were the same. That restless energy softened now. She smiled when she saw me, and it wasn't a smile meant to convince. It was honest, uncertain, human. We talked for 2 hours, not just about us, about life, her new job, her travels, my writing, her therapy, my solitude. She didn't try to rewrite the past. She didn't ask for a second chance. She simply offered herself as she was, flaws and all, and in return, I did the same. At the end of it, she stood and said, "I'm glad you came." I said, "Meant to," and that was it. No hug, no promises, just a quiet parting on the street, both of us walking in opposite directions. Lighter somehow. Closure doesn't always come in answers. Sometimes it arrives in the willingness to stop asking questions. After that, the days returned to their quiet rhythm, but something had shifted again. I was aware of it in the way I moved through the world. A little more open, a little less afraid. I started writing short stories. Nothing big, nothing for publication. Just small moments, fictional vignettes inspired by real emotions. I wrote about an old man who pretended to read on park benches just to eavesdrop. About a girl who collected lost earrings. About a couple who only spoke through handwritten notes passed under a door. It felt good to create without pressure. To give my heart a voice that wasn't buried in memory. One afternoon, I attended a local writer's reading at a small bookstore downtown. I didn't plan on reading anything. I just wanted to listen. But halfway through, someone dropped out, and the host asked if anyone wanted to fill in. Before I could talk myself out of it, my hand was up. I read a piece I'd written the week before. About a man who falls in love with a voice he hears through his apartment wall, only to discover it was a recording left by the previous tenant. When I finished, there was silence. Then applause. Then a quiet woman approached me after, said she loved the rhythm of my words, that they felt like a conversation with someone you hadn't seen in years. Her name was Lena. We didn't fall into each other. Not like the stories. We walked. Slowly, step by step. She was a high school literature teacher, wore round glasses, loved forgotten poets, carried tote bags filled with papers she never graded on time. We met for tea, then again. Then again. There was no performance, no trying to be charming. I told her I was still learning how to be with someone without trying to fix or be fixed. She said that sounded like a very good start, and so we built something. Not from sparks, but from warmth, from shared silences and inside jokes, from the space to be exactly who we were on good days and bad. She once told me, "You're like a house that's been rebuilt after a fire. Still standing, still beautiful. But you can smell the smoke in the walls if you listen closely." I asked if that bothered her. She said no. That maybe we're all a little smoky in places. That love isn't about finding someone untouched. It's about finding someone willing to stay even when the floor creaks and the lights flicker. We didn't rush. We didn't label. But one night, as she lay asleep beside me, her fingers loosely wrapped around mine, I realized something simple and quiet. I was no longer carrying anyone else in my heart. Not Elise, not Julia, not even Mira. They were part of my story, yes, but they no longer dictated the ending. And maybe this wasn't the ending either. Maybe Lena would stay. Maybe she wouldn't. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what would come next. I wasn't gripping the moment like it might disappear. I was living it, breathing it. And so, as summer slipped toward autumn again, I found myself whole in a way I never had been. Not perfect, not fixed, but real, present, capable of love not because I was unscarred, but because I'd stopped hiding my scars. I once thought love had to be loud to be real, that it needed drama, pain, redemption. But now I know. It's in the way someone holds your name gently in their mouth. In the way they make tea without asking how you like it because they already know. In the way they see you even when you forget how to see yourself. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most powerful love of all. ChatGPT said, "Titula, what we carry, what we leave." Autumn came like a final exhale. The leaves turned, the days shortened, and the city folded into itself with the quiet dignity of something that had seen too much light. I began to crave the sound of boots on wet pavement, the steam off a cup left too long untouched. Lena and I found our rhythm in the slowing. Mornings with jazz playing low. Evenings spent reading on separate sides of the couch, occasionally breaking the silence to share a sentence or a sigh. We didn't try to capture the moments. They just lingered, soft and unfiltered. We were not a perfect match, but we were present. And that had become enough for me. She left her scarf once. That was the first thing she forgot. A simple, striped scarf she always claimed was just a borrowed one, but never returned to anyone. I picked it up and placed it on my coat rack without thinking. Then came her earrings on the bathroom sink, a half-finished crossword folded into the pocket of my jacket, her brand of almond milk beside mine in the fridge. Nothing dramatic, just small evidence of someone gradually planting their presence into your quiet. She didn't ask to move in. I didn't ask her to. But one evening, as we stood in the kitchen arguing over whose tea collection had taken over the cabinet, we both laughed and realized neither of us had been sleeping anywhere else in weeks. It felt real. It felt earned. After everything, after Elise, after Julia, after Mira, there was a cautious confidence in how this began. I didn't need Lena to complete me, and she didn't need me to save her. We stood beside each other like two trees that had learned how to bend without breaking. We made no grand declarations, no future etched in stone. But every morning she stayed, and every night we returned to each other, the pages wrote themselves. I began to wonder, could this be it? Not the fireworks, not the fairy tale. Just love, honest and functional, steady as breath. Then one evening, everything tilted. It started with a phone call. Lena answered in the hallway, her voice low and taut. When she returned, Her face had changed, not with panic, but with a kind of blankness I'd never seen in her before. "That was my sister," she said. "My father's had a fall. It's not good." She was already packing a bag, her motions quick but precise. "Where?" I asked. "Krakow," she said. "I might be gone a while." I nodded, uncertain. "Want me to come?" She hesitated. "No, I think I need to do this alone. He and I, it's complicated." The words left no room for insistence. She kissed me once, soft and brief, and then she was gone. The door closed with a sound I'd grown too familiar with. That subtle hush of departure that always sounds the same, whether temporary or forever. I told myself not to spiral. Not every goodbye is permanent. But when the first week passed with no word, then the second with only short texts, and the third with silence, I began to feel the weight again. Not panic. Just that creeping familiar uncertainty that starts to feel like an old coat you once promised never to wear again. I sent a message. Then another. No reply. I called and it rang twice, then went to voicemail. I waited. I told myself she was grieving, busy, emotionally depleted. I told myself she'd return. But I'd told myself the same stories before, hadn't I? Then came the letter. Again. Another envelope in my mailbox, this time in neat, familiar handwriting. My chest tightened as I opened it, half dreading, half hoping. Inside was a single sheet. "I need more time. I wish I could explain it better. It's not about you. I promise. It's just when I saw him lying there, fragile and quiet, I realized how many things I'd never said. And now that I've started saying them, I can't stop. I don't know who I am when I'm not fixing broken things. I don't know what parts of me I left behind to be okay. I thought I was ready to love someone else, but I'm still trying to love myself. Please don't wait. But know that I'm grateful. For you, for everything. It was not cruel, not dismissive. It was heartbreak, written in the language of someone who had finally learned to see herself clearly. I folded the letter once, then again, and placed it in the drawer with the others. The ones from Elise, from Julia, even one Mira had left in my notebook months after she vanished. And I sat there, staring at the drawer, wondering what it meant to be the person people leave kind goodbyes to. I went for a walk, past the bookstore where I first heard my own words echo back to me, past the coffee shop where Mira once sketched dreams she never shared, past the corner where Julia and I laughed the last time she touched my hand, past the brick wall where Elise kissed me like it meant something permanent. Each place held a version of me, each one a fragment. But as I walked, I noticed something else. Not the memories, but the way my body moved, calm, deliberate. I wasn't chasing. I wasn't grieving. I wasn't even angry. I was whole, not untouched, but whole. And for the first time, I realized what that meant. We think the point of heartbreak is to survive it. But that's not it. The point is to absorb it, to let it carve into you so that something new has room to grow. Love isn't a guarantee. It's a risk we take again and again, not because we forget the pain, but because we believe something deeper waits on the other side of it. Not a person, not a happily ever after, but ourselves, sharper and softer all at once. I returned home, lit a candle, and wrote in my journal. This time, I didn't write to anyone. I wrote for me. About the boy who once believed love had to be dramatic. About the man who learned that quiet love is not lesser love. About the truth that people don't complete you. They reveal what's already complete inside you. Weeks passed. Then months. Lena never returned. I never saw Mira again. Julia moved to another city. Elise got married, according to a mutual acquaintance. None of them came back, and I didn't wait. One winter evening, as snow began to drift against the windows, I held a small reading at the bookstore. My stories now belonged to a slim volume I'd finally agreed to publish. Nothing major, just a local print. 38 stories about quiet moments. No heroes, no endings, just truth. A woman approached me afterward. She looked nervous, said she'd read one of my pieces in a magazine and came to hear me speak. She said my words made her feel like she'd been heard. We talked for a bit. Nothing flirtatious, just real. When she left, she said, Your stories don't feel like fiction. They feel like memory. I smiled. Because they were, just not all mine. And so I walked home, book in hand, collar up against the cold, and felt something unexpected. Hope, not for a new love, not for some perfect chapter waiting to unfold, but hope that I'd keep writing, that I'd keep listening, that I'd keep showing up to my own life without needing someone else to narrate it. That night, I stood at the window, the city blinking below, and whispered something I hadn't said in a long time, not to anyone else, but to myself: you did good. And for once, that was enough. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.